Welcome back to the Matt Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Turck from Firstmark. Today, we're diving into the fast-moving world of AI video with Gaurav Misra, the CEO of Captions. Now, if you've ever struggled with creating videos, endless retakes, clunky editing software, figuring out keyframes, Captions uses AI to eliminate all of that. It's a production studio in your pocket, using AI to make video creation as simple as pressing a button. Gaurav and I talk about how Captions went from a viral weekend project to a company now powering over 10 million creators.
The next day I woke up and I just saw all the numbers just blowing up completely, and we're number, top 20 or 30 on the App Store. But our framework was actually to look at society and to think about what are the inevitable changes that are happening in society. We knew that means that creating video is going to be a huge industry in the future.
Why AI-generated video is past the uncanny valley.
As soon as it got good enough, I think it very quickly crossed the boundary of wow, it's very good. And we're actually past the uncanny valley. It became completely usable. What we actually ended up realizing is that people actually don't care.
And what happens when you put Hollywood-level production tools in the hands of every creator?
I think for video editors, there's a small chance that it actually becomes the most important profession of them all, because they don't need anything. They just generate all the footage, put it all together, and they're done.
It's a fascinating conversation with one of the sharpest minds in the space. Let's get into it. Hey, Gaurav, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
I like to start those conversations from the very top. What is Captions?
Yeah, so in short, Captions is a production studio in your pocket. So it's an app, a product that basically lets anybody make video as simple as possible, right? So think about all the process that you have to go through to create a video, right, as an individual creator. So you have to record the video, and obviously you're going to get something wrong. So you do retakes and get that word right, and mispronounce something. Sometimes you notice something after the fact. It's oh my God, that's so weird, right? You want to redo it. So just the recording is hard enough. There's the editing afterwards, where now you have to go figure out what's a keyframe. And, in order to get a good output, you need to know what a keyframe is, right? There's a huge learning curve to these things, and we help people skip past this. Mm-hmm. So an easy way, a framework to think about how and when to use Captions is if you want to do video recording and video editing, you should use something else. Yep. If you don't want to do it, you should use Captions.
It's a pretty magical experience, right? So you have your video, you import it, you pick a style, right? Mm-hmm. And then you basically have a magic button, and on the other side of it comes out a video which is edited, where you can automatically cut the hesitation and sound and pauses.
Exactly.
Kind of stuff, right?
Yep. So not just the recording part, you can skip past, so we can generate a video of you, yourself, or anybody you have the license for. So if you have a license for somebody else's likeness, or, we also have actors sort of available in the app that you can pick from. Mm-hmm. We can generate a video of that person saying, whatever your pitch is. Maybe you're pitching a product, maybe it's an ad, maybe it's a social media post, right? We can generate that, and you can get it perfect. You can say exactly what you want to say, test different messages, whatever it might be. And then we can edit it also, right? So that it, because just footage is footage. Footage isn't exactly usable most of the time. Mm-hmm.
And when you say actors, there's avatars?
Exactly.
Okay.
So these are basically real people who have licensed their likeness to be used.
Okay. So it's either you or you can just completely create the video just typing.
Exactly.
Okay. Yep. All right. Very, very cool. And tell us about the company. When did you start?
Yeah. So at this point, we started 4 years ago. So it was actually February 19th. Yeah, that's right. Or January 19th. Sorry. It was January 19th, right, 4 years ago. Yes. Just past that. It was my co-founder's birthday, actually.
Okay.
When we founded the company. Yeah.
And what was that story? How did you meet your co-founder?
My co-founder and I met about 10 plus years ago. We were at this company called Localytics, which was
right in Boston, right?
Exactly. Yep, exactly. It was a mobile analytics startup, and they were one of the first to be doing that in that space. There were many companies that came around. I remember companies like AppBoy, which became Braze.
Right. That was a super hot space in the early 2010s.
Exactly, right. And that's where we met. And we only overlapped for maybe 3 or 4 months, actually, which is crazy, by the way. Mm. And we kept in touch for almost 10 years after that, because Dwight, that's his name, he moved to New York after that 3-month overlap. He left Localytics. He moved to New York. I ended up moving to New York later to join Snapchat. Mm-hmm.
But what did you do at Snapchat?
That was 2016.
Yeah, and what did you do there?
I joined originally as a machine learning engineer. I transitioned to product design, which is a rare transition, I think. But it actually really helped me in my path to starting this company. Right? Because think about it, product design plus machine learning, hard to beat as a combination. Yeah.
Yes. And then after your, I guess, stint at Snap, like how did that come about?
Yeah. So, I mean, we had actually been meeting up in New York. Like we would meet at this place called Rye House. It was like on 18th Street, actually, not too far from here.
Right.
We would meet like every 6 months or so and discuss like startup ideas and like what we wanted to do. And we were both like, we knew we wanted to start a company, but I think we were both of the opinion that, oh, it's not the right time, because we were doing well in our careers and stuff and things were generally going well, in the world of the economy and the companies we were at. It never felt like, oh my God, like I can quit my job right now and start this thing. And there was always this lingering, like, do I know enough? Like clearly, like I'm not experienced enough to start a company, right? Obviously, like that's completely false, but it feels like that, right? And so we were both in that mindset until, and by the way, this went on for like 10 years, right? So until 2021, basically, right? So just post-pandemic, what happened was things were very inflated, just heavily. Like even the companies we were at, right? Like, I mean, Dwight was at Goldman, so I don't know what to say about that, but I was at Snap and Snap was worth $100 billion, right? Like, which is 5 times more than that in the current valuation, right?
Yep, ZERP times, yes.
Exactly, right? And so it felt to me like this is unsustainable, right? Like it just didn't feel justified. And sure, we were getting paid a bunch of money and stuff because the valuations were so high, but it felt like this is going to dip and then we're going to have like a 10-year road to recovery. And I didn't want to be a part of that journey. And I was like, this is the perfect time to start a company, actually.
Smart. And so that was the two of you. How did you guys get started? So 2021, clearly pre-ChatGPT moment.
Right.
How did you get started, including on the tech and product front?
We actually started with the idea of revolutionizing video. I think the long-term plan was AI plus video, but we knew that the AI part would take like 10 years, but at least that's what we thought at that time, right? But the main driver and, our framework for evaluating the initial ideas, especially, and I think, there's a unique framework for figuring out truly like groundbreaking and generational companies. Like how do you build those companies? Like to start a company is much easier, I think, than to start like a truly groundbreaking company, right? And a lot of luck is involved. A lot of hard work is involved, of course, all the classic obvious ingredients. But our framework was actually to look at society and to think about what are the inevitable changes that are happening in society, right? And these could be things like, 5G networks are available, right? That changes how people can now upload and download video on their phones, right? Or maybe it's something behavioral in society that's changing, right? Like, and there's a lot of behavioral changes actually happening in society right now, right? Which are inevitable, unstoppable, right? They will complete over a 10, 15-year period. A lot of times it's driven by technology. A lot of times it's driven by just social behavior of the masses, right? And if you identify one of these, you can see a world 15 years later that's going to be post-change and pre-change, right? And our framework was to think about what are the companies that are going to be needed and thriving in this post-change world? And can we identify one of those companies, right? And start building it today, right?
So it's a very strategic way of thinking about what company to found. You have like different heuristics for starting a company, but it sounds like you guys were very kind of strategic and deliberate in terms of like macro tailwind.
Totally, right? Especially because, the normal advice is like do what you enjoy doing, right? But I think we both enjoy doing a lot of different things or solve a problem for yourself, right?
Yep.
And I think we thought about those things, but like we didn't really have a lot of problems, to be honest.
Fantastic.
So it really came down to solving problems for other people. And that's really what's more exciting to me. Like the most exciting thing to me is to solve a problem for somebody else and help someone, right? So with that in mind, we came up with this approach of like looking at macro trends, right? And trying to figure out where we can have a change. So, the biggest macro trend at that time was video. Video was the fastest growing medium of consumption. It still is, right? Continues to be. And it was essentially like, TikTok came out 2019, right? In the US at least. It was crushing basically every other type of social media. Like it was, and I was at Snap, so I saw some of this firsthand. I actually was running the team that was building the response to TikTok internally at Snapchat. And by the way, like TikTok spread in the US mostly through Snapchat. And this is like not well known out there today, but a lot of it was they were spending a very, very large amount of money on advertising on Snap, right? And there were discussions internally often about like, should we be selling this advertising to TikTok, right?
That's a wild story. I never heard that.
Yeah. And we ran A/B tests actually within the advertising groups to see like, oh, like let's segment some users out, not show them TikTok ads, see if they behave differently in the long run, right, in terms of engagement on Snapchat and stuff like that. And there was no difference. And so it was decided that, well, we should just sell them the ads, right? It's making no difference. It was very wrong because it had a big difference. But the difference just took a long time to get to be realized, you know? And actually, like, it affected some of the core markets. Like Snapchat has very engaged markets in the Middle East and in like parts of Europe and stuff, especially like Norway and a bunch of other countries where almost all age groups are engaged with Snapchat. And it even depressed those markets, you know? So video was eating all of this stuff, right? And we knew that means that creating video is going to be a huge industry in the future, right? And bringing all these tools that are only in like, you know, production studios' hands essentially, right? Like you have to spend $10 million to make, you know, an artificial shot of something, right? Or a movie or a small video or whatever, an ad, right? What if that was $10 now, right? And everybody had access to it. It almost felt a little bit like coding, like what software engineering is to like civil engineering, for example. Civil engineering, you can imagine all you want, but you can't actually execute anything because you need a lot of resources to do it, right? Software engineering, someone sitting in their basement can make something that disrupts, you know, an entire like massive multi-billion-dollar company, right? So it's that energy brought to video, right?
Fascinating. And fast forward to today, to give people a sense of scale. So I've read somewhere that you've now worked or empowered over 10 million creators around the world. Is that an accurate number?
Yeah, and growing. And that was a little bit of an older number too, but the one that we've announced so far. And it's, you know, paying customers in over 180 countries, basically everything except the obvious ones, and growth in all the different countries as well.
And you've raised over 100 million in venture capital.
Yep.
The team is 70 people, you were saying before we started recording
70 people, yep.
Okay, very good. All based in New York.
All based in New York, fully in person.
In person. Okay, really, really interesting. Okay, cool. So let's start diving into the meat of the product itself, and maybe starting with sort of positioning of the product. So clearly, you know, one obvious question is there are creative tools in the world. There's Adobe and Premiere Cut, like all the things. So how do you differentiate, and how do you think about those? Is it just a completely different target?
I think it is a completely different target because I think a lot of, you know, if you look at like Premiere, right, you know, some of that level of professional tool, right, these are truly designed for the people who are making careers out of it, right? Like they are literally working on this. That's all they do, right? And their skill set they've built over maybe decades working with these pieces of software, right? And I think that's what makes it actually hard to innovate in these spaces, is because people have so much built-in muscle memory about how things have been done that if you come in and change a bunch of stuff and be like, here's a simpler video editor, people actually don't like it, right? They're like, well, why, right? Like I already know how to use this. You mess things up, right? You moved everything around. It's not where I need to be, right? I think that's where a lot of this fails often, is you go and sort of sell it to the person who's a professional. But I think really for us, the goal from the beginning was not to sell it to the professional. It was actually to enable a new set of people who actually wouldn't be able to, or wouldn't have the time or energy to invest into learning a professional tool, to let them actually now be able to dabble in this, like in this space, right?
Whether it's almost like editing, software engineers to use some of the, you know, going the same route at the analogy that you were using. It's a little bit like software developers on the one hand versus no code.
Totally. Yeah. Very true. Very spot on.
And, for that group of people, there are also solutions on the market. We were talking about TikTok. So famously, they have CapCut.
They do,
as well. So how do you think about that set of companies?
Totally. So I think there was actually a lot of where those companies came from, like CapCut specifically, if you look at it, right? I mean, the main goal of CapCut is to grow TikTok, and you know, it's a virtuous cycle there. That's kind of why they have it. But they actually came up with their own set of goals, because it is a separate company under ByteDance, right? There's TikTok, which is a different company than CapCut. As different companies, they have different goals, different CEOs, etc. CapCut's goal actually became inspired for Canva, actually. And they're aspiring to be like a Canva, maybe a Canva for video. I think this idea has been floated around a lot, because people looked at the last decade and they saw like basically Figma and Canva as two sort of major design companies that took off. Figma went after the professional and Canva went after the non-professional, basically, right? And it's actually a very similar story to what I'm telling, right, in a way, because Canva is explicitly used by people who do not design, right? In fact, designers may hate Canva. They might think it's, it's not good. I could easily make something better, right? I could easily see a lot of designers saying that, right? But for the person who doesn't know how to design, it's amazing, right? And the main reason is it wipes away the blank canvas. There's no blank canvas on Canva, right? Which is the hardest part of designing anything, is you open this thing, you see a blank canvas and there's like 6 buttons to make squares and circles. And now you have to come up with something that looks good, right? Really hard. No matter how simple you make the UI, by the way, right? It doesn't matter how simple the UI is. I mean, design, there's only 6 buttons, right? There's nothing more than that, right? It's not complicated. It's just creativity that has to be applied on top of that, right? And there's some level of skill that needs to be built up of how do you convert these 6 buttons into UI that looks good or into design that looks good, right? So that's what Canva solved. And they solved it with templates. You just apply a template and you get something nice. And then you have some opinions. You're like, oh, maybe this orange could be like red, or here, I'm going to change a font here, or maybe the text I'm going to update, and you've made something, right? It's like almost like the easy baking, right? Like just add an egg and you're done. And I think that's what they did really well. But when that analogy, I think obviously VCs and a lot of founders immediately were like, wait, Canva for video, right? Like, of course, it's going to be a thing. But it actually didn't become a thing for a long time because it wasn't the same way analogous, right? People were making simple UI for video editing, but simple UI doesn't matter, basically. You still get a blank canvas, and now you have to figure out, like, how do I make a good video, right? And that's the hard part. And that wasn't solved, right? The interesting part that we figured out is even with CapCut, and with many of these other tools, they try to apply templates and, but the problem is that video is just very different than design. Like you actually can't templatize video because the nature of it is it's unknown, right? It could be saying anything, it could be doing anything could be happening. The template just can't it can't understand what's happening in the video until now, obviously, right? And I think that was the big change. The reason that AI video editing can exist even is because AI has transformed so much, right? And that actually is the key that unlocks suddenly what templates had unlocked in the design world, right? Is suddenly machines can understand exactly what's happening in the video. They can know who's there saying what to whom, when, why, how, what's happening, when cuts should be made, when B-roll should be inserted, what types of images will go well with the background over here. Like maybe we want to have like a purple themed image, like, right? So all that can be understood and done automatically. The footage can be completely generated, so you can get the perfect footage, right? That says the things at the right time. All the things that actually Canva enabled for design can be enabled for video now, right? And I think that is the big difference. Whereas I think CapCut's approach is much more traditional. They're actually just trying to do exactly what Canva did, which is, okay, let's make the UI simpler and add a few more buttons and essentially bootstrap it to TikTok and distribute it like crazy. So
the people that you empower with those tools, so are not designers, are not video editors. So that's your TikTok creator crowd, Reels. Is that
a lot of creators, small businesses? So those are, I would say, the 2 largest sections. I would say a small business is probably the biggest subsection, where I think what you end up realizing is like social media and marketing are just hand in hand now, and including like ads, right? Like when you run ads, it's just social media, but you're paying for the reach, right? And that's a massive industry with a lot of footprint, especially among small businesses. So e-commerce, think like individual businesses, like I would say personal trainers, for example, real estate agents, things like that, where you need to make video as part of your job for some reason or the other. And you don't want to learn all of the skill set, right?
Yeah. And that can be a little bit of a tough crowd, right? Like they're very demanding and it can be fickle, no? Like what's yes or no?
I mean, maybe a little bit here and there, but nothing more than normal. I think one thing that we did well sort of in the first couple of years of the company is we actually kept the application paid only. And that
filtered out
it just filtered out anybody who's not right. Exactly. Right. So it really left us with the people who are willing to pay and who have a strong enough use case, basically, right? So everything they asked for was very reasonable, right? And so it was a clear way to build a roadmap and filter out the noise.
Oh, that's really interesting, right? So you chose to like monetize first, as you were saying, not necessarily to monetize, but to filter out people, which is sort of the counter, the other way around from what you see a lot of people do, which is to open the floodgates and make it free.
Okay. Yep, totally.
All right. So on the product, so you started with Captions,
of course,
which was aptly enough the name of the company. Yes. So why that at the beginning?
Initially, we knew that we wanted to do video creation with AI. Now, at that time, this is pre-GPT, Transformers were there, but no one cared about them at this point. Essentially, we looked at all the different ways that we could apply AI to video, and we wanted something robust enough that it actually works reliably and works really well. And one of the things that was at that point was transcription, right? Speech to text. Something that, but, interestingly, what we found at that point is like, even though it was actually like a part of daily life in many ways, like, Siri and Alexa existed at that time. And, these were consumer products. They were out there and people understood that speech can be understood by machines. But I think people were shocked, surprisingly, like I think outside of tech circles, like the everyday person was kind of surprised to see how good it was. In reality, they could understand all this obscure terminology and really perfectly word for word get something, as it was said.
So what did you use that at the time? Was that Whisper already? Or like,
it was we used something else pre-Whisper. I don't remember what it was originally, but we were one of the first companies to implement Whisper when it came out. That was
Whisper being the open source speech to text model developed and launched by OpenAI.
Yeah, exactly. So that's when the OpenAI, hype started. Basically, we did switch over to Whisper originally, but initially we had some model. I think it was some other model by Google. So the original app was made in a weekend, like literally in 2 days, and launched. And it wasn't marketed at all. It was just put on the App Store. And the next day I woke up and I just saw like all the numbers just blowing up completely, and we're like number, top 20 or 30 on the App Store. And I just called Dwight and I'm like, hey, looks like a lot of people are using the app, like 600 videos per minute being made right now. It was like, oh, nice. And because I think we just didn't expect to we had literally just started the company 2 days ago, we had just incorporated.
That is wild. Yeah. I mean, that's every founder's dream, which actually never happens.
Yeah. It was almost
what happened, like somebody posted about it,
somebody did
on social overnight.
I mean, so we had done a little bit of research when we chose this. So we were browsing TikTok. And by the way, I think if it doesn't go away, like TikTok is a great way to discover what is trending. And I think at the end of the day, finding a good idea to start with very tactically, not in like a strategic way, but a very tactical way, ends up just being finding something that can go viral, right? That's really all it is. And that means that it resonates with people, right? And we did a lot of searching for TikTok. We're like spending 10 hours a day on TikTok just browsing videos. And one of the things that we saw is like people were, there was a huge accessibility movement. People cared about like, reaching all audiences and like people who are hard of hearing and all those things. And so people were spending a lot of time literally manually typing out text, right? And then on the other side, we saw sort of more in the Asia market, especially in Japan, like they always put like these big words. This is also from TV over there. Like they'll always put like these really big words that show up in the middle of TV, and it's like funny and like just entertaining. And we're like, wait, that plus transcription in the US. Maybe that's the combination. And we can do all of it automatically. APIs exist. Like we can build this in like less than 2 days, basically. So we built it and put it out there and it just instantly took off. I think someone found it and posted it on, I think, TikTok.
Amazing. What an amazing story. So like fast forward to today, you got a whole suite of products. I was just looking at some notes as I was prepping for this. So you got AI Edit, AI Creator, AI Ads, AI Twin, Lip Dub. Maybe like the quick version of what those various components do.
Yeah. So the short version is that we have 2 core products, actually, AI Edit and AI Creator. So AI Creator mirrors the camera, right? So it is actually the AI version of the camera. So once, as AI Creator develops and becomes perfect, you will not need to use the camera anymore, right? So you'll just be able to generate all the footage that you want. Today, it does talking videos, right? So videos where one of the actors that we have or you yourself are like saying something. AI Twin is just specialized version of AI creator where it's yourself basically. Now, the other is AI edit, and this mirrors the editing, right? So you can edit it yourself, or AI edit can do it for you, right? And that's totally up to the user how they want to do it. Or they can wait for AI edit to do it, and then they can make some changes. So combined, this ends up in an experience where you can go from a quick description of what you want as a video to a completely usable output that you can go and just post or use in whatever context you were hoping for.
And from a product building perspective, those sound like two fairly different kinds of problems. First of all, is that right? And second, maybe walk us through some of the unique challenges of each.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely slightly different types of problems because one is sort of a classic video generation problem, right? Which most of it comes down to just the model itself, right? And how the model is designed to generate the outputs that we need. And then obviously the UI around it to like make it easy to use. Now, on the editing side though, it's a different type of model, right? And same idea, right? It's like a large model with outputs that essentially act more in like an agent sort of behavior as opposed to like a media generation behavior. But it's the same flow of data that's training that where, because you kind of have to go end to end, right? In fact, like the real journey actually starts at the script, right? You write the script, then you record the video, and then you edit the video. The script generation part, we don't take on because we think the LLMs and stuff will solve this eventually. I think they're still not very good at video scripts and they're getting better and better, but we do think that as these models improve, this will be a solved problem. We focus on the ones that we are well positioned to sort of take on, right? Which is the video generation part, so recording and the editing. You alluded to some of the models, so let's get into that. What do you run on in terms of like core models? What is third party? What is maybe open source? What is proprietary? Yeah, so essentially internally what we work on is just video generation, right? That's kind of where our core area is, like what we can really excel at because we have the data for it, we have the talent for it, and we have the unique ability to build that specific type of model, right? Now, for everything else, we use some sort of provider, and we've tried basically all of them at this point. So we've been able to figure out which ones work best. But it's an evolving space, and so every 2 or 3 months, we have to retest everything to just understand where everybody is. There's often, winners that come up over and over again that we see over and over again, like 11 Labs, for example, comes up over and over again in the audio space as... And that's who you use for We have been using them for a long time. Okay. Yep. What other providers or like anything that could be helpful to people who think about, building AI products in terms of, I don't know, what's worked, what's not worked as well. Right. I mean, so we were on OpenAI for a while. They had a lot of downtime and other issues that were happening. I think that was an intermittent problem. Maybe it's solved now. So we switched over actually to Microsoft OpenAI for a while. And that actually did a lot better. And that's OpenAI for what part? So this is for script generation. For script actually, generation. It's like pre-video, basically. Okay. But also like within the video here and there when we need to figure out certain editing things, we might use one of these models. But for the most part, Microsoft OpenAI did much better in terms of reliability. It just worked perfectly for latency and never went down, which is what you want. It's great. But we ended up switching to Claude. So now we're on Claude. And that was just because of... Which Claude? We're on 3.5. Okay. Yep. 3.5 Sonnet. Yep, okay. Exactly. Okay. Yep. And how did you make the decision? Why did you switch? What are the pros and cons? Yeah, so we actually run an evaluation every few weeks to a month, basically, across all the different models. And we actually have a very unique way of doing this. And probably, an evaluation that almost no other company can do, not just on, the LLM side, but also on the audio gen side and other things like music and sound effects. And I mean, these are all things come together to make a video, right? At the end of the day, and this is like an important thing to think about is like, if you look at all the media generation foundation models, right? Like there's like music generation and image generation and even stock video generation. And, there's, voiceovers and you name it, sound effects, right? Like where do you think this is all going? Like, what do you do with the sound effect, right? Like, you generated a sound effect. Now what? Like, you don't share a sound effect with a friend. You don't post a sound effect on social media.
So you created your own evaluation benchmarks for all
you
of that?
put it in a video, right?
Yeah.
That's where it's all going. Everything is going in videos. Right? All the stuff is going into videos, getting posted on social media. So we can actually evaluate, when the user in their workflow is like, I generated this voiceover and I don't like it. Delete. Right. And to a different user, we can show a different model. Right. And they might be like, yeah, I do like it. Right. And so we can compare from the user perspective, perceived, when they're not being paid for this, they're paying us for this. Right. They have all the incentive to pick the best one for their use case. Right. We can tell you exactly which one performs the best. Right. And exactly which ones user prefer when they're actually paying for it and it's right in front of you, right?
So it's a form of RLHF.
It is. It is. Exactly. Right. Yep.
So then you got that flywheel.
Yep. So this helps us like figure out like which ones are the best, basically, and we always surface the best models for the user.
Can you infer from if a person makes one choice that they're likely to make the next choice, and then you make the recommendation based on that? Is that
we can. This is all granular? Stuff possible in the future, but not something we're doing right now. But
okay. All right. So we talked about third-party providers, OpenAI, Claude. By the way, it's interesting you switched from OpenAI to Claude Sonnet 3.5. We had just recently Amjad, the CEO of Replit, who also is building Replit on top of Sonnet 3.5. So it seems like there's something in the air.
Yeah, they're doing something right.
Yes.
And I'm curious to see how some of these new models like O3 and stuff perform.
Yeah. Well, very impressive. We're recording this right after the release of, I guess, Mini O3 and Deep Research last night.
Yeah, which is super cool.
Yes, the pace of release continues to be absolutely
and
impressive.
DeepSeek and all that, right?
Yes. So those are the third-party providers, and then so you're saying you're building your own models as well for video generation,
right? Yep.
So that's actually the avatar, that's the edits, or both?
It's both. So actually, I didn't mention one thing, which is on the third-party providers, we also have image generation in the application, right? So people can include images in their video.
For the background?
Exactly. Okay. Yep. So we are using Ideogram for that one because it generates really good text.
And sorry, I keep interrupting you. Your models.
So the two models that we sort of work on ourselves are video generation and video editing, basically. And on the video generation side, we have a very unique view, is that, if you look at all the video generation models today that are doing text to video, they're all silent videos, right? There's never anybody talking. It's all B-roll, right? It's all essentially shots of New York, right? Shots of the beach, right?
B-roll is the background, right? Just to get the lingo.
Exactly.
B-roll is the background and A-roll is
primary footage, basically, like what actually tells a story. So to give you an example, like imagine that we were filming a movie, right? And when the movie opens, right, it might cut to like 3 shots of New York City from different angles, like a taxi cab going on the street, right? Like New York here, busy things happening. And then it enters this room, right? Boom. That was B-roll. A-roll begins here, right? And then the dialogue begins, right? And that's just to set the tone of where we are, who's involved, right? And then you get into like the real footage that's actually telling the story, right? Which is always like dialogues and monologues and like people talking, right? That's what storytelling is at the end of the day, right? And sure, you can make a silent movie, but do you want to? Is that what all movies should be? So I think that's kind of what we realized, and we really focused in on talking videos, is what we call it internally, as what we want to focus on.
And talking videos meaning avatar generation or
so
anything. So both the editing use case and the talking head avatar use case are powered by the same model.
They're different models.
They're different models.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. But for the video generation, it's just diffusion model, but it's conditioned on audio.
The diffusion models.
Yeah.
Okay. Based on open source or your own?
Based on stuff we're sort of building in-house, essentially.
Okay. Yeah. And what data do you use?
Yeah, so all proprietary data. So the data that we're training on internally is all fully licensed, completely proprietary. So, obviously part of it is data we get from operation of the app itself, but we also purchase data. And we're going to be in the future also generating custom data as we start to realize that there's certain niches in certain areas where you just can't get data very easily.
Is it really hard to get video data these days? Like, you still can't crawl YouTube, right? Only Google can do that.
Yeah. I mean, you can do anything you want, but should you is the question.
Yeah.
I do think, like, if the goal is to sell to enterprise, it's like really hard to justify it if you're crawling YouTube and,
Yeah.
how do
That's
you...
a fundamental flaw in the legality of it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And what is working very well and not working just perfectly just yet?
So what's working well is what you would expect, which is that you can put more and more data into these models, increase the number of parameters, and they will get better, basically, right? Of course, save any bugs or anything else that might be happening. Now, what's difficult, as always, is to solve, because we are in a unique space from that sense, right? We're doing this A-roll video, and so there's unique challenges in that. Like, audio conditioning is just, it's not a thing that really has been solved at scale, and nobody else has done it, right? And so that means that we have to be the first ones to run into these problems, try a lot of different things until we figure out what is the best way to solve them, right? And then scale that up, right? Which is also all very expensive, by the way, right? So there's only so many mistakes you're allowed to make, right? Because every mistake has a price. So running into those types of problems is where the challenges are. But I think, to be honest, like, that is also where the fun is, really, right? Like, it's like saying we're climbing Mount Everest, but it was all really easy, right?
Yeah. Was lip syncing, for example, a particularly challenging area?
It was, yeah. I mean, I think it wasn't obvious which encoder to use, for example, for audio, right? I mean, and there's a lot of pros and cons of using a lot of different ones. Like, you could use ones that are derived from text to speech, for example, or sorry, speech to text, right? So whisper encoder comes to mind, right? And things of the nature. And what you have to balance in there is, obviously, if it's encoding for transcription, it might lose all the emotion. Right. It doesn't need that information, right? So it could be discarding all of that for you, right? It could be losing timing information. I mean, Whisper, particularly, like, it doesn't output timestamps that well, and it's kind of like okay at timing information. Like, it does 30-second chunks and stuff. It could be losing a lot of timing information. So, like, if you lose that, then the lips will definitely not be in sync, right? So these are the types of things that you have to, like, list through and figure out which one could work and which one doesn't work in different situations, right?
And for the captions themselves, so you're well known for the quality of the captions.
Yes.
How much of this is Whisper, and how much of this is stuff that you had to innovate on? Like, especially, I would assume if you have a bunch of creators recording, there might be like a noisy environment or that kind of stuff. Like, how do you solve that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like, Whisper is already trained on that type of data, right? So it does work really well for those types of things. But what Whisper isn't good at is, like, it has a core set of languages that it works well on, and there's other things it doesn't work well on. And I think figuring out the limits of Whisper in different places. So to be clear, like, we don't train transcription models, but we do, work on that product area very carefully, right? And a lot of it is like figuring out what works well and for which use case and which condition, right? And then essentially using a series of different models, correcting each other's mistakes, using it like, oh, what do you use for, like, I mean, for example, Whisper doesn't work in Arabic that well, right? So we had to figure out how to make something work in Arabic, but it can't be bad because almost all transcription is bad in Arabic, right? There's just not enough training that's been done on that language. So things like that is what we figure out. So it's a lot of more like product and engineering work rather than model training.
Is there a world where you would do fine-tuning on a per creator basis? So, like, for the bigger creators that may have certain ways of doing things, you would fine-tune the model to just go directly to their style?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I think on video generation it could be very interesting, right? But I think at the end of the day, if the conditioning is expressive enough, right? And we're talking like text, image, audio, right? At least these three. You should be able to I mean, that's the point of a foundation model, right? Is to be able to mold it into whatever is able to work on unexpected, untrained and things it wasn't trained on, right? And it can be molded into any particular situation without any fine tuning. So I do think that's very possible and very, very reasonable to expect from, a foundation model that's large enough to then train on enough data.
It's fascinating what you said about, focusing mostly on engineering rather than the model themselves, which, seems to be the recipe for success of a lot of AI application startups.
100%. Yeah. Training a model is expensive. I mean, you have to pick your battles on that one, right? You can't be going around training everything.
Yeah. And it was somewhat controversial a year ago, like the famous like thin wrapper thing,
Right.
and now like everybody seems to have actually accepted the idea that actually there's tons to build on top of models that actually creates real value and differentiation.
Totally. And I think like the unique thing that you end up realizing is like actually the amount of complexity in a UI that you actually have to build, right? Like, I mean, for us, building a video editing application, by the way, like even putting the AI aside for a second, right? Let's say that was a solved problem, right? And we figured it out. It's all solved. It's done, right? Just building the ability to render all this stuff on video on your phone, right? Like the technical challenges involved. This is probably one of the hardest things you can do besides maybe building a game, right? Which maybe the hardest thing you can do. This is one of out there. Like you're using the GPU for that too, right? Like rendering all the video, encoding, decoding, all these different formats. Like there's OpenGL running, there's shaders running on top of that are placing elements and making things disappear and appear and rotate in 3D, right? This is hard stuff, right? And doing that on a browser on top of that or on an iPhone, right? The camera's on at the same time, all these different sensors are running at the same time. The GPU is running for both models and for video encoding and rendering. Like this is as hard as it gets in terms of like technically something you can do, right? Like on one end, you'll find like applications that are just like, oh, this is just a button on a screen, right? Like easy to design, easy to build for the most part, right? And a lot of apps actually fall in that category, right? Like we actually are hard mode in a way, right? Like there's no buttons on screens, right? It is all complicated UI, really hard to design. How do you make something that has 1,000 different possibilities simple for a user, right? You have to really understand the user. And you just have to be like really good at design, really good at product, really good at engineering, right? Across the board, everything has to be good.
How hard can it be?
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's presumably a constant trade-off between providing power all in one and then maintaining the ability to edit and say no to certain
which is really
options,
important. I think for it to be usable, that is actually the key, right? Like imagine if Canva just had templates, but you couldn't edit them. You can't change anything. Import one, you're done, right? You can re-import a second one, but you can't change anything, right? That doesn't work. It breaks the whole thing. So I think it's a key element, actually.
So to unpack some of the things you were saying, so then what happens if OpenAI or Claude comes up with a fantastic video generation model that creates perfect avatars? That's a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing, right? I think we're working on, like, at the end of the day, like, we own the customer relationship. And if they build a model, we'll include it as another option in the app, right? No big deal.
And everything you are describing still comes on top anyway.
Totally. But we are making the unique bet to say that we can actually build a better model than they can because of our unique data sets.
Yeah. And a lot of the app, going into some of the engineering challenges that you were describing, a lot of the app is real time and very responsive, including on mobile. So like, how do you think about local AI versus sort of cloud AI?
I think obviously we prefer moving as much as possible to local just because that means it gets removed from COGS and sort of from the financial perspective, it's awesome, right? I think not all models are there yet to be able to do that. I think a lot of the easier models, I would say, like transcription, things like that, you can run locally very easily and that cost can be eliminated. But to be honest, even running that on the server is not very expensive. So it doesn't really matter that much, to be honest, except like maybe offline access for users is more like a user benefit. But for the video generation models, we're not there yet exactly especially for the type of users that we're going after. Like they might have older iPhones and stuff, right? So like they may not have the latest and greatest. They might have 2 generations before, which may not be able to run like a large model essentially on device, right? Even if it's distilled quite a bit. So, and people do care about output. And I think like one of the main criteria for the ability to actually use something, like for it to be like actually practically useful versus entertainment and just like interesting, is how photorealistic is it, right? And it has to be past the level that the average person can tell that this was generated. If that's not the case, then it's not actually usable, right? And we kind of saw that boundary being crossed about, I would say, maybe a year ago or something of that nature. And, we ourselves run a lot of ads and social media posts and things like that for marketing purposes. And we started using generated sort of videos for that in that time frame. And initially people were like, oh, this is like so fake. Oh my God. Right. And then very quickly it became nobody knew any better. Right. Nobody commented on it at all. Right. People were just like, it's just another video with a person saying something and they can't tell. And very quickly for us, it became, wait, this actually performs better than if we were to, hire someone to like make this video basically, right? And the reason is because we can customize it to an unlimited ability, right? Like we can get all the variations, test everything and find the perfect optimum, right? Like performer, right?
Okay. Let's finish on engineering. Like this is super
Yeah.
interesting. I want to go into that as well. But just to finish on engineering, another thought that came to mind was latency versus, because this seems to be working very fast. So
Right.
I guess how do you optimize for latency, especially across mobile and desktop, which have sort of different kind of requirements, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, so we actually start off first by thinking about like, how much will a user actually wait? And this is something that we can actually measure. And, we've done a bunch of work in the UI and stuff to make the experience of waiting as nice as possible. So we'll notify you when it's done, the whole push notification. We even do like the little thing that shows up, the dynamic island, the thing that Apple marketed so much, right? Just like you see like an Uber delivery kind of coming close, you see your video being generated on the screen. So we've done all the things you would expect from a UX perspective to make the process of waiting as nice as possible for the user. But even with that being said, like people don't want to wait, right? Especially the consumer type customer. They don't want to wait. And we can measure the different drop-off rates and we kind of end up with like, okay, like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, that's kind of where we want to be, right? And so after that, it's just an engineering challenge. So we started off by, okay, let's like divide the video into pieces and generate it in parallel, right? So this is a significant effort. And we designed this entire system of how we're going to do it, how, we were splitting the video into like 25 frame segments basically. And 25 is 25 FPS. So that's basically a second. And then we were generating overlaps on both sides, 4 frame overlaps with the next segment. And then we would check for differences in the overlap and pick the right, right one to make it sure it's a consistent and smooth sort of flow from one second to the next. And then it would just send it out to this entire cluster. We would just eat the entire thing in one go, right? So now the video takes as long as like 25 frames, basically, right? As long as that takes. And yeah, this is very spiky, by the way. Like if you're sending like a lot of videos through, like these are explosions, right? Like 60-second video means 60 requests, 60 machines occupied in 1 second, right? But it did mean that for the average user, the experience became really fast, right? But the whole process of like doing all this stuff and stitching it is a complicated system, right?
Yeah.
It is transferring, and these are frames of video, right? At HD or 4K resolution sometimes, right? Because we generate 4K. So this is like each video is, a lot. It's like maybe 10 gigabytes of frames, right? Being transferred around constantly across all this, stitched back together, unstitched again, then re-stitched back and then generated and, processed and upscaled and all this happening seamlessly behind the scenes for like in 2 minutes, your video is ready, basically.
Amazing.
Yep.
What's the stack, the AI ML stack? You mentioned at some point like OpenAI running on Azure. Like, are you in a Azure shop? And I don't know, what do you use for whatever model orchestration or like what any tools or any part of the stack you can talk about?
So we're primarily on Google. So Google Cloud is what we use mostly for our backend systems. Obviously we're using like non-Google providers for different like sort of select niche services that we're doing. So like image generation or, various types of like 11 Labs, for example, with voice generation. But for the core services, compute, we're using Google Cloud, including a lot of the GPU work, which by the way, we get GPUs for 2 reasons, right? One for media processing, which is a different type of GPU, right? Like there's GPUs that are designed for media processing. And by the way, like the H100s and A100s kind of suck at encoding and decoding video, right? They're actually slower than like a T4, for example, which has like media sort of like drivers and stuff that can actually like do it really quickly. So we have to have these 2 different types of GPUs. And that also means that work needs to be passed between the GPUs oftentimes. So like an A100 and H100 might do the generation of the video because it needs 80 gigs of memory and all this like fast AI processing. And then once the frames have been generated, they get passed to a T4 behind the scenes that's actually doing the stitching and the encoding to H.264 or whatever the format is. So all this has to be sort of orchestrated together. And a lot of that's happening on Google, but now for the H100s, we're using like niche providers basically that we're stringing together with T4s that Google is providing at really good cost.
And the orchestration, you use some I don't know, LangChain or whatever, or like was that?
We're actually just building it basically. We're just rolling it on our own. Yeah. Okay. So it is very like niche almost in a way because, we have to build these pipelines of video processing because you might imagine, for example, you recorded a video and then let's say you were like, oh, actually, I mispronounced a word. So I'm going to change that word and correct it to what it actually is, right? And then that sentence over there, like my eye contact isn't very good. So I'm going to look at the camera in this sentence. I'm going to change that, right? So you're actually taking the same video and like applying layers and layers of AI processing on top of it. One, like change your lips and maybe you say the right thing. The other one, change your eyes to look at the camera, right? The third one might be doing something else. So we have to like, obviously we don't want to have a system where we're uploading all these frames and then it does the thing and then we download 10 gigabytes again and, and the next thing and then you send it back and then, you want to do all of it in one streamlined flow. So that's the type of stuff that we have to work on to make sure that all of it is as efficient as possible because every time you're doing it, there's encoding and decoding involved as well, right? The video encoding and decoding. And so that's just another sort of layer of complexity and of time consumption. Oftentimes we found that the video encoding and decoding takes longer than the AI processing, which is like, oh my God, like we're waiting a minute for the video to encode.
Yes. Hallucinations, is that a problem? What do you do about it?
I think it's a feature, actually. Right.
It's a feature.
Yep. So, I think hallucinations in text obviously can be a bad thing, potentially, because they're saying stuff that, isn't true. But in a video, like, you are delegating a lot of decisions to the model. Right. Like at the end of the day, like the purpose of having the model and the main benefit, by the way, okay, let me make a quick comparison here, right? Like you can always open up Maya and dream up any scene you want and design it in 3D and render it with ray tracing. It will take maybe more time than the AI processing will take, right? But you will get a really nice output and it will look great, right? At the end of the day, right, like I think AI is awesome, especially for media generation, but it's not solving a new problem that hasn't already been solved, right? It's the same problem and it's actually a solved problem, right? It's just making it a lot easier, right? So I think with that in mind, it just makes it much more obvious sort of what to focus on, right? And hallucinations and stuff, these are like features essentially in this world. Like we're saying that the model will make the decision for me, right? And sure, I didn't specify that I wanted a white shirt or a green shirt, but it just gave me a good shirt and it looked great, right?
Oh, interesting, because like in your world, more options are better.
Exactly. And like, I don't want to make all the choices, right? Part of the reason I'm coming here, otherwise I would just go to Maya and design everything exactly as I want, right? Part of the appeal and the reason that anybody can access this technology, like there's not a skill gap basically, is because we're taking away a lot of the choices, right? The model is making these choices for you, where the model knows what good lighting looks like and 3-point lighting, and like the model just knows, what type of shirts you should be wearing, or I don't know, whatever. Right? So if you don't specify it,
and you don't have cases where people say, no, I do want a green shirt, and why do you keep showing me?
If you write it down, then it will do it, right? What it will hallucinate is what is not specified, right? So I think the prompt adherence is really important, right? What you're saying must get done. But everything else, it's all hallucinations. It's good, right? We should hallucinate everything.
And prompt engineering is a big part of what you do. We talked about fine-tuning, a little while ago. But like most of what you do in terms of passing on instructions to the model is I guess, system-level prompt engineering.
Prompt engineering is actually really important, even for the models that we train ourselves, right? Because every model is trained on prompts in a certain way, and the more we can. And certain models are just better at certain things than other things, right? So a lot of it comes down to like, what is the model the best at? And how can we massage the words to fit the distribution of the originally trained text that it was given, right? And that's prompt engineering, basically. So we do think about that a lot, not just for our own models, but also for like, other models that we're using.
So I want to go back to what you were starting to talk about a few minutes ago. So do you think we passed the uncanny valley for those videos and avatars?
I think definitely, but it is kind of a moving target. I'll give you an example, right? So, and this is an example not related to us, so it'll be like more clear maybe. So I remember, when I first discovered 11 Labs, which was like a while back, I heard the voice and I was like, oh my God, this is going to be transformational. We need to like work with these guys. And like we reached out to them immediately. They didn't respond immediately, but, and they were a very small shop at the time. It was truly like nothing that was there at the time could compare to what they had done. Now, some time has passed, obviously. And even a year later after that, the most common complaint that I got from people was like, oh, it sounds so robotic. It sounds so robotic. And it's like, wait, what? Like, this is the same thing. Nothing has changed. But I think just people just got used to hearing it so much that they just figure out its nuances, right? And it's the same thing with video. Like a year ago, a video just wasn't good enough to even be presented to users potentially. As soon as it got good enough, I think it very quickly crossed the boundary of like, wow, like it's very good. And we're actually past the uncanny valley. It became completely usable, right? I think very quickly people will start realizing now that, oh, there's like certain nuances, it moves certain ways, it does certain things that you can just tell, if you just know and you've seen enough of them, you can tell that this is generated, for example, right? And then our job is going to be moving past all of that, right? And then people will come up with new ways to tell, and then we'll move past that until there's no way to tell, right? But I do think the point of, complete perfection in terms of generation where there is absolutely no way to tell is still a couple of years out, especially in terms of this type of A-roll video, because a lot of the core problems haven't even been fully solved yet. But I think today we already are at a point where a vast majority of people cannot tell the difference, right? They can look at it. Like we run these things in ads, like on scale. We also run these things on social media. Big creators use, these models and they get tens of millions, sometimes many, many tens of millions of views on their videos, and nobody can tell that it was generated. There's no comment or anything that says this was generated. So
do you think there's an element of social acceptance as well, where people may be able to tell the difference but may not
say
care?
anything? Yeah, I think that's definitely a big part of it, right? What we actually ended up realizing is that people actually don't care. They just want to be entertained, right? And actually, even the reason that they might comment that it's AI generated is just to get clout, right? Like they're just trying to get likes on their comment. Like they're like, I figured it out. This is AI generated, right? And everybody's like, oh yeah, it is, and they like it, right? So that's basically why they're doing it, right? Like it's not that they hate it or something, right? It's just that they want to show that they're informed and they figured it out, and other people to like their comment. That's all, right? And so. But we're definitely past that point too. So like now most people can't even identify it, right? So there's not even that comment anymore. And so the really cool stuff that we started seeing was actually in the last 6 months where we realized that, especially with ads, you can actually outperform a traditional content production workflow. And you can actually beat what can be done with just sort of human creators, because you can create an infinite number of variations, run a lot of these in parallel, find the winning output, right, which you just can't do with all full person-based production, and just get the maximum value essentially, right? But the most interesting beyond that also gets into sort of the localization aspect of it, right? Because finding a good creative in English is hard enough. Like finding something that just resonates with people is hard enough. But once you get that to work, now you got to figure out how to make it work in every other language, right? I got to make it work in Spanish and French and German, right? And rediscover it, redo it from the beginning, right? But what we figured is like actually just dubbing it literally with lip dub, and now it's like the same exact script, just in a different language, delivered the exact same way, right? Actually performs just as well as the English version, right? Which was a crazy discovery for us. Completely unexpected.
Is there a world where all of this becomes completely real time as well?
It's possible, yeah. I mean, I think it's not something we're chasing after, but there's definitely companies that are going after that.
So what does that mean for the future of like creation and storytelling? And also, I guess as a related question, what does that mean for the future of professional video editors?
Yeah, I actually think that this is really big for the future of professional video editors. I mean, so our goal actually isn't to disrupt professional video editing, right? It's actually to enable, and it actually probably creates more professional video editors, because a lot more people can get into the profession, right? Because they may have been too scared of opening Premiere Pro before. And now they can actually make cool stuff, right, with a little bit of dabbling. And of course, the next question they're going to ask is like, oh, how do I move this? And how do I change that? And that gets them into it, right? And they get better and better. And sure, maybe one day they graduate to Premiere Pro, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's completely fine with us, right? But I do think that the craft of video editing will change. We're not going to be the ones maybe to change it, or maybe we will. I don't know, right? The future will tell. And this is, by the way, not the first time that craft has evolved, right? Like craft evolves all the time, right? A great example is just like music. Like 50 years ago, you needed to play an instrument, right? To play music. If you didn't play guitar, you're not going to be a musician, right? Mm-hmm. And then digital music came along, right? And suddenly, like anybody can like go on a computer and write some music and it plays and it sounds really good. And a lot of people thought this is bad for music because like now there's going to be all these bad musicians who are going to be making music, right? But I think the reality is there was just more music and more musicians and maybe even better music and new types of music that didn't exist before, right? So I think it's the same thing. Craft is evolving, right? And people will evolve with the craft. I think for video editors, there's a small chance that it actually becomes the most important profession of them all. It actually is possibly the profession that rules them all because suddenly one video editor sitting in their basement can make a movie that goes to theater, right? Because they don't need anything. They just generate all the footage, put it all together, and they're done, right? That might be a real possibility.
How far are we from that? What does that depend on? Does that depend on Runway or Sora doing the B-roll while you do the A-roll?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely could be. I think, obviously, for a movie, all the cinematic shots and stuff, all the B-roll is going to become really important, all the A-roll. And then besides that, the editing, right? So as soon as we can put all that together, there's a lot of steps along the way, like everything from character consistency, which everybody talks about quite a bit, but really what it is today is just face consistency, right? But face is not enough, right? Everybody has one body. It doesn't change shot to shot, right? It has to be the same exact body, the same like hand size, height, or whatever. Like everything has to be exactly the same, but even location consistency, right? Like we're sitting here, the next shot better be looking exactly the same, right? Not slightly different. So these are the types of things that will have to be developed over time in order for all this to be enabled. But I think it's all very solvable because we've already solved it.
Not to kill the mood, but I feel like any conversation about AI video would not be complete without the inevitable conversation about deepfakes and taking people's appearance and making them say stuff that they don't want to say. Mm-hmm. So how do you think about it and what do you do about it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Something we spend a lot of time thinking about, to be honest, right? Because I think of all the possible sort of AI unlocks, like even compared to LLMs and stuff, there's probably nothing more dangerous than video generation in a way, right? And we have actually a framework of how we think about this, right? So if you think about video, it actually splits into two categories for us, right? There's what we think of as like documentation. This is like from a personal level, this might be something like you taking a picture with your family, with your friends, or video for that matter, right? For documenting like, oh, we were here, we were at this restaurant, we had fun, right? Like it's literally capturing the moment that actually occurred, right? But on a non-personal level, it could be a journalist documenting a war happening, right? What happened? Who was involved? Where did people go, right? What were the good and bad things that happened in, some situation that they were documenting literally, right? That's sort of one side of things. On the other side, you have what we think of as like storytelling, right? This is everything from ads, movies, TV shows, like literally all the things that entertain us, right? Nobody has the expectation that these will be completely true, right? Like when you watch an ad for Geico, like you're not thinking that there's a gecko selling insurance somewhere out there in the world and they captured it finally, right? And even reality TV and social media and like, it's all designed for entertainment and fun. Like it's designed to make you laugh, have fun, and maybe imagine something that you would never have imagined before, right? But on the documentation side, there's no good thing that AI video can do. Not one good thing, right? Like it's all bad. There's nothing good. So if we can find a way where we can prevent any impact to the documentation side, there's only positive, basically, that AI video can do, right? Everything is just about more people having access to be able to tell better stories, entertain more people, have fun, right? Mm-hmm. There's absolutely all positive. So that's the framework that we use.
What's on the roadmap for the next year?
A lot of good stuff. So a lot of it is going to be bigger and better models, basically, right? So I think in our current biggest model, we're only using like less than 1% of our data that we have, our proprietary data. So we're scaling up those models, and they're going to be, coming to market over the rest of this year.
And if there was one thing in the AI world from a technology standpoint that you would want to happen that would really help you, what would it be?
I think it's already happening. CapCut's getting banned, so I mean, there's rarely I think you may not be able to give an example of a situation where a company's competitor has been banned. Like, it's just unheard of. In the US, at least.
Okay. Fantastic. A few words on the business itself. So you started with what mostly looked like a PLG type motion product led growth,
right?
And you were saying at the beginning of this conversation how in the beginning you charge for people, but now you made the product free. At least there's a free tier. Is that correct?
Yes.
So maybe walk us through that evolution, and how do you sell currently?
Yeah. So it is a consumer application first. So a lot of our distribution happens through consumer channels. The app started off as a completely paid product. So it was a rare sort of premium only app. I think it's almost like non-existent at the time, or people would call you crazy for it. It actually helped us develop the best possible product by just collecting the best possible feedback from the users who are willing to pay. And then more recently, we actually switched to the freemium model, which is like more recognized, because we realized that we can offer a lot of the classic video editing stuff, right? Like literally the old way, right? What people used to do, which is manually record your video, manually edit your video. That should all be free, right? Because there's no cogs in it anyways, right? It doesn't cost us anything, right? So why should it cost the user? And we think that's the old way anyways, right? We should just give it up. And then our goal is to convince those users to try the new way, right? And hopefully we can convince them that they don't need to spend an hour recording and editing a video. They can just tap a few buttons and generate it.
As your go-to-market motion evolved to include some outbound sales now, as presumably you go into larger accounts. You mentioned some e-commerce companies.
Definitely. Yep. So one of the big things that we noticed from the very beginnings of the company is that the consumer growth actually wasn't all truly consumer. It was a lot of small businesses, but it was actually a lot of like medium and large businesses as well, including some enterprises. And a lot of people were using it as a consumer app. So they didn't have consent from the company to use the product, but they were still using it. And there were many people in each of these companies using it. So I can't give any examples, obviously, for obvious reasons, but these are like very, very large organizations, right? Like some are trillion-dollar organizations. With that being said, it made it quite obvious that there had to be like a similar sort of growth vector to how many PLG products have grown sort of into the enterprise sector. So for us, a lot of our sort of broad growth comes from the consumer, but we do have a B2B team now that's working on essentially converting some of those users into enterprise contracts, especially the ones that are in enterprise already.
And from a gross margin / unit economics kind of perspective, it's always super interesting, right? We all, as an industry, experimenting with what it is to build a company on top of foundation models from a business standpoint. What is your experience so far?
Yeah, so it started off being more expensive, and the price has gone down, right? It's literally only gone down. It's gone down more than 10 times every year that that we continue down this journey. So the price is decreasing not just at the GPU level, which is obvious, right? Those prices are coming down, but also the models are getting more efficient and the software is getting more efficient and, the use cases are getting more efficient. So with all of those things, suddenly there's a huge compounding effect of cost reduction on sort of these COGS. Today, for us, COGS is like the least of our concerns, basically. I mean, to give you an idea, like if we were to remove a lot of the sort of capital investment in, model training and things that are long-term value for us, like we would be cash flow positive or something, like it basically doesn't matter.
To close, you and I are both in New York.
Yes.
And proudly so, which is a little bit still, if you listen to certain circles against the dominant narrative that, that you can actually build top-notch AI companies in New York. So this is our New York rah-rah moment.
Exactly.
Jokes aside, what has your experience been? Why did you decide to build a company here? Why did you decide to have everyone here versus distributed?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like from the very early days, like we started during peak COVID, right? Like 2021, right? And it was a time where you couldn't even, like San Francisco had their hotel shut down, right? I remember you couldn't even go there and get a hotel room, right? Yeah. And so we were a fully remote company. But as soon as COVID started exiting, we realized that to start a company, there's just nothing like being in the same room. And so we started doing the in-person thing. First started with 1 day, then 2 days, then 3 days. And it became 5 days very quickly. I think New York is uniquely positioned because of a couple of reasons, right? One is that in-person companies do have an advantage over not in-person companies. No one is willing to say it. I mean, now many more people are, but like it is very true that there is an advantage there. And the advantage is not just, in terms of like, oh, the meetings are much more efficient or something like that, right? It's actually even on a personal and relationship level. People actually get to know each other. Like think about me and my co-founder, Dwight, only overlapped for 3 months and we kept in touch for 10 years. That would never have happened in a Zoom meeting, right? It just wouldn't. And those are the types of, like, you need trust. You need, right, like people to be compatible with each other, to be able to work together closely and build something amazing. Like there's just nothing like being in person for that, right? And New York is actually well positioned to be the best place to be in person, right? Because a lot of people live within, 20, 30 minutes, very easy commutes, trains everywhere, things generally work, right? As compared to like other cities where it might take like a long time to commute and stuff, right? New York, everybody has these small, tiny apartments. Everyone wants to get out. Like it is actually designed for an in-person environment, right? Yeah. And so I think that's like a big advantage, to be honest, right? Like it actually gives a unique advantage to New York companies that choose to do the in-person thing around how they can have a permanent edge over any other company that's based in any other place, right? Because they all tend to be like generally remote or hybrid.
And what has your experience been in terms of technical talent?
Really good. I mean, honestly, like a lot of bigger co's also moved to New York over the last decade and stuff and have built up enough sort of muscle that there's a lot of great talent already here. I also think, interestingly, post-COVID, there was a huge migration from San Francisco to New York because I think people suddenly, had the ability to be remote. And they were like, wait, why am I in San Francisco? Where should I be going? And I think the choices were basically New York or LA. And a lot of people ended up in New York, which actually I think was, in my opinion, what raised a lot of the rent prices and stuff in New York is everybody from SF sort of migrating over here. But I think it created a lot of talent that is sort of hidden talent. Like they don't exactly work in New York. They actually work in SF, right? But they live here. And that's sort of their underlying the overall trend.
All right. So if anybody listens to this and is not based in New York and think that's just an insufferable conversation, first of all, we love San Francisco as well. And second, I think the broader point is that great companies, including very much great AI companies, can be built in a lot of different places.
Definitely.
One region doesn't have the complete ownership of great companies. So,
definitely. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. That feels like a wonderful place to live it. Congratulations on everything you've built. Very impressive, fantastic story, and excited to see what's next in the next year or two. So thank you very much for doing this.
Awesome. No, thank you for having me. It's great.
Hi, it's Matt Turck again. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mad Podcast. If you enjoyed it, we'd be very grateful if you would consider subscribing if you haven't already, or leaving a positive review or comment on whichever platform you're watching this or listening to this episode from. This really helps us build a podcast and get great guests. Thanks, and see you at the next episode.